Good evening, everyone. So thank you for attending this talk. We have some wonderful artists here to discuss their work, and of course Neville, who I'm sure everyone is familiar with through this event. My name is Karen Excel. I'm the Executive Director for Cultural Strategy and Development at Diriyah Gate, which is basically where we're sitting, just adjacent to us. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with Diriyah and the significance for Diriyah in Saudi Arabia. So what we're going to do in this session is talk about some of the innovative processes that are being utilized in parts of Saudi Arabia and the Gulf region, which inspire visual artists, looking specifically at how artists today are highlighting archaeological discoveries in the land beneath our feet through their artworks, and really talking about this idea of a sense of place and identity. And I like to use the term legacy here, so how do we see that legacy coming through in multiple different forms in the works and in the curatorial processes? So what we'll do is I'll just say a couple of words about Diriyah, and then I'm going to hand over to the discussants. We'll be starting with Sarah, and then Christiana, and then Neville. And each person is going to talk a little bit about their work, present some of their works that's relevant to this theme, and then we'll have some questions, and then open it out to anyone who'd like to enter the conversation. So I think I click this. Yes. Okay. So this is obviously at Taraif, the World Heritage Site. I'm sure everyone has visited. It's absolutely beautiful in the evening. So this is part of the development that I'm a part of. It sits on, it's the reason for the development. So there's a big master plan that's being developed in the vernacular architectural style of mud brick architecture, linking back to Taraif. And running through the heart of this development is Wadi Hanifa, which is obviously the most important part and the reason for the development. So this is just a slide that gives you an idea of why we're doing this development. This is the vision for the new development. Diriyah is the capital of the first Saudi state, and where the ambitions for the kingdom first started and where the ambitions for the kingdom are today. It's the birthplace of many kings and heroes and home to many historic sites that are relevant to Saudi history. And it's the 300-year-old site that reflects on the essence of how Saudi Arabia came about. So this is why there's so much interest in developing around this site. Obviously, Taraif became listed as a World Heritage Site over a decade ago now. And you can see here, this is a CGI of what the new master plan will look like, and running through it, or around the edge here, you have Wadi Hanifa. So this is just a quick summary of what we're working on: Diriyah Gate, Wadi Hanifa, and also Wadi Sfar, and really bringing these sites back to life. So I just want to say a couple of words about why Wadi Hanifa matters so much. So Wadi Hanifa is the reason that for the significance of this site. It's the fertility of Wadi Hanifa that brought people here. The rich farmland made the location an ideal place to settle, and since then, and to this day, the Wadi has been farmed. Historically, due to its value, the Wadi was protected by an extensive defensive wall. It's a place of multi-layered histories, of communities, of practices, of learning and knowledge exchange. It's being studied today to understand its physical archaeology and the intangible legacies this archaeology represents, as well as the natural flora and fauna. The work that we're doing here on Wadi Hanifa will focus on returning the Wadi to traditional planting and preserving the flora and fauna, celebrating traditional farming practices, and bringing life to the Wadi's social history through interpretive interventions and programming, including a public art program. So we have plans for a series of artworks that celebrate the caravan route through the Wadi and the traditions and legacies of the Wadi, with artists encouraged to work with the local materials from the land around them and to use traditional practices and crafts in their work to really focus on regenerating these traditional practices. And absolutely the heart of this public art program is a celebration of the unique sense of place of Wadi Hanifa through time. So this is really the reason why Diriyah matters so much, and using art is really important for reaching back and celebrating the legacy. And so I want to use this session we have to talk with the artists today about how they themselves connect to a sense of place, to identity, to legacy in the multiple different ways through their artworks. So we'll begin with Sarah Brahim. I'm going to pass that down. So Sarah is a visual and performance artist specializing in immersive video installations. She works across many mediums to present work rooted in the experiences of the body. Through her pieces, she examines how somatic gestures create a language that can voice grief, metamorphosis, the unseen form, and our relationship with the natural world. In 2022, the artist's work was presented at the 16th Lyon Biennale, the Diriyah Biennale, and the Noor Riyadh Festival. Brahim's first solo exhibition, Sometimes We Are Eternal, was showcased in the fall of 2023 at the Ballet Foundation in Switzerland. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you for having me on this panel. I guess the best thing is to just dive in. And a work that I have a huge affinity for was the work I was able to do last year in the Noor Festival. Riyadh is the place where I was born, but not where I spent all of my life. So I have like a weaving relationship with it, and in the last years working in the art community here has been incredible just to see the impact and how I guess it's really changing for the youth and the children now who get to visit these works, which is something a lot of my colleagues and I feel is kind of being repaired from our childhood, which is kind of this beautiful thing. This piece was in Wadi Hanifa, under the Jeddah Road Bridge, a place I always found was like a bit of a spiritual sanctuary for me. It's these like enormous brutalist columns, and it's a place where nearby there's a lot of picnicking anyway, but in particular I think it was the first time it got used as an installation space. So you would kind of arrive and see all these multi-layers of the columns, and you were given your soundscape. And as you walked down towards the light, to the film, you had this like intimate sound. You could kind of go into this individual experience, but you still hear the sound of the cars and the road above you, and you're in nature as well. So I loved this clash of nature and the city and your own senses all coming together to one point. And the film was a 5-chapter performance piece, 5 solos, 5 performances, and each performer was embodying archetype of light throughout the day. So it started with like the sunrise, and then had midday, afternoon, sunset, and evening, and they were embodying what that felt for them. I directed it, but it was really coming from the performers and what they felt called to, which type of day they felt most called to, and which type of performance they wanted to construct. And what I loved about this experience is, for me, it was really creating a bridge between the public and the private, which is something that exists a lot in this community and culture. And so giving the ability of the viewer to be in public and this kind of majestic, expansive space, but having a really intimate experience, I felt was very important. And I don't know if this, this is my favorite thing that happened, maybe ever. And these 5 kids like wandered off from their parents, their families, and they sat here watching for 2 hours. So they saw the film, I don't know how many times, and they came and talked to me after, and we were discussing their futures and what they want to do, and they had never seen like movement on such a large scale. And I think that was a really unique opportunity of the festival, because in other cities, like maybe you take these things for granted, but I think in general it was a very unique situation for kids to have access, honestly, anywhere to you know, see movement and like embodiment in like a very sensitive way that wasn't particularly, the content wasn't, let's say, for kids. And I think that was the point, is it's, you know, bringing them into like what's possible with sound, with experience, and yeah, creating a new sense of wonder and memories in a place that they associate differently. Yeah, I don't know if I should keep going. This is the work that's here in the exhibition. I just wanted to say a little bit in relation to embodiment and memory. This year I had like my love, I fell in love with analog film and analogic cameras, and the beautiful thing for me with that is like my practice is very mobile, and it allowed me to bring the camera to wherever I was working at the time and film. So the footage is a collection of 1 year, 1 year of recordings and research, and kind of going in the body and out of the body. And the way that analogic film works with light is something that's very special, that I feel harnesses differently than a digital medium. And this was also the first time I experimented with a process at the end of the film. Half of it kind of repeats, and I was hand painting the film and also adding some qualities to it by painting to it, and also using an erasure method. So at the end of the piece, I wanted this feeling of present moment, because some of the images of the memory are being blocked and some are being erased at the same time. And I loved this feeling of, that's kind of how we are in the present. We need to move forward, but also kind of keep forgetting as we move forward. We can end with this, maybe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If I could just ask you a couple of questions about your work, particularly this work being located in Wadi Hanifa.
Mm-hmm.
So you talked about the structure, this extraordinary structure that the work is projected on. And obviously your work now has added to the multiple histories of Wadi Hanifa.
Mm-hmm.
Did this, other than the structure, what about Wadi Hanifa was influenced the work in terms of the content, the experience, or how you wanted people to experience it?
Well, I think the base for me of everything is going to be like essential elements. So the fact that it's a conserved natural place, I love that exists, and that people already come there. It's already a gathering place. That's very important for me. And then really the drive for me of that was to reassociate, for people who really grew up here and were here for a long time, to reassociate the sense of place. That feels super important, because I had to do that also as things like progress, and every day here, like we're seeing changes. So I think for me it was about, especially for children, being able to come to a place they associate one way, being to be like, things are malleable. I can imagine this differently. And I think to do kind of a very extreme thing, like by putting such a, it was just a fabric cinema screen, not an LED, to do something that was very, extreme, but also non-invasive, was like, for me, very successful way to make an impact. Yeah.
Yes, it's respecting that place as well as adding so much more to that experience, and really tapping into, because I do find it extraordinary how people are always coming to Wadi Hanifa. It's like you don't have to do anything, but there's a rootedness, and people are always coming back there. So there's, a very emotional connection all the time. And every intervention we do there, we have to think about how people are multiply experiencing this all the time. So you can't just do something dramatic and overlay. You have to be sensitive to the layers of connection there.
Well, I think there's a lot of ways you could use that bridge in an installation, but for me it was the walk down was very important, and that the like celestial body of water and physical body were meeting. It was very then easy, you know, like people are drawn to water, and so it felt like the appropriate way to direct the experience.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to move on to Christiana De Marchi, and we'll circle back for some general questions in a little bit. So thank you, Christiana. So Christiana is an Italian-Lebanese visual artist and writer who lives and works in Dubai. In her practice, textiles, embroidery, film and performance, she continuously makes and unmakes the relationship between time, space and memory, exploring how gaps in the sequence of thought cause memory to dissolve and become dispersed. She reveals how memory can alter our relation to the past, how a circular repetition of continuously revisiting the past can actually change the structure of time, opening up the possibility of a renewed future. This act of breaking down memory into its consultative parts ultimately allows spaces and narratives to be redefined, reconfigured, and reshaped. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you. So my practice is primarily, I have to go forward a bit more. Okay, now I have to go back. Primarily, I work with textiles and video and performance, but I also was trained as an archaeologist, which is something that I first and for many years saw as completely dissociated from what I do as an artist, and progressively realized that left a lot of traces in my ways of understanding the artistic practice as well. So actually, this is the work Mapping Gaps. It's a map of the city where I grew up in Italy, and it's really work about memory, which deals with the gaps that, of course, incur after a long time that you are living outside or abroad, or that you are away from places where you used to be very familiar to. So I was really interested in gaps, and archaeology is all about gaps. It's really like a retracing of gaps in order to rebuild a picture which is in fact not available in its entirety. I do that with different kind of approaches. Maps is something that I use extensively. For me, they are always like reflecting on different questions, and they are in a way embodying questions that I'm interested in. So if the first one was about memory, this one is about public and private spaces. It's a set of 22 maps of the Arab countries' capitals, where I'm working with a monochrome, and because it's a monochrome and I have to translate a multiplicity of spaces in the urban surface, I need to work on the way the light interacts with the thread. So the light is really important in this body of works, where you would have with the technical, they're all like handmade embroideries, so I really kind of figured out ways in which I could translate my own concept. But the light is the element that really gives the illumination to the piece, and that allows you to see the distinction between the different areas, which are otherwise, if you see them like frontally in a flat way, they are practically invisible. And this is like one map of one of the cities, so it's really extremely difficult to see what it is. Whilst when you see it with the, let's say, the angle of the light, you will have the full picture available. And working on negative spaces is also something that, again, can be in a way connected to my archaeological background, I would say. And it's really like when you work on an archaeological site, there is always this element of the object which was once there but is not there anymore. And then you have the negative trace that you have to be very attentive to, of course, in order to collect and then retranslate in a formal kind of physical three-dimensional piece. So working on that, like this one is a map of the Mediterranean Sea, where I'm looking at the borders and the maritime borders, which separate countries, are an extension of territorial borders, and they are actually in the sea, which is clearly like something with deep implications as it comes to migration routes. And yeah, so, and here again, it's something where you have to train the eye in a way to see something which is quite familiar. I mean, it's a map that if you would see realized in the opposite way, with the let's say the countries as something embroidered, and then the empty space of the sea would be extremely easy to recognize. This way, you have to pay a bit of attention to realize what you're looking at. And yeah, these are here we go a little bit into that notion of identity in a way. For me, this is it's a self-portrait. It's a self-portrait as contested waters. So I'm looking at waters, again, territorial waters, but waters which are which are not agreed upon between two neighboring countries. And so that space is the thicker space in between, which is actually resulting from overlapping threads from the two sides. And that creates like a third space, which is the contested space. But it's also, if you can look at that as a metaphor of ways in which we like create identity from multiple experiences, where the experiences pile up in a way. At some point they create a space which is not the original space. It's something that is a creation, identity as a creation of something which is not like a given, but it's something acquired. And again, I work clearly quite a lot with this sense of inaccessibility of the work itself. So this one again is a work where you would have to really see at an angle and with the assistance of light. It's a series of Braille works where I'm translating legal text into Braille and then embroidering them on canvases, black canvases, with this is the Convention on the Rights of the Refugee. And it's really a question of accessibility of the text, and once again, it is something that in the process of creating identity, we often have to make that effort of translating and retranslating and getting into a certain situation which is not necessarily given from the beginning. And there are like still a few more slides. So this one is a series of videos which are all titled, I mean, the series is titled Doing and Undoing. This one is Borders, but I also worked on identity and nationhood, memory. So where basically I write the word and then I remove the stitches, and this process is looped in a way that clearly goes on and figuring out the renegotiations that we have to deal with in the various like areas of interest of the specific works. And then this one is a more performative work where, once again, I mean, I try to trace back some of the works that, for me, retrospectively have a relation with my archaeological background. So these are like sculptural pieces that I kind of, they're sculptures for the camera in my own understanding. This piece has been actually, the white piece is, I realized it as a hand knitted piece, and then has been stretched as a canvas. But in the process, what I was interested in was the performance. So the whole process, which looks quite laborious and tedious, was focusing on the performance itself of these 7 sculptures. And I'm not sure if it's still moving. Yeah. Yeah. I think this is it.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. So just a comment and a question. I think I also trained as an archaeologist, and I think my experience of that taught me that archaeology, mostly it's missing. And we tend to think because it's giving us physical, tangible objects, it's telling us about the people and the experiences. But what is missing from that is the people, experiences, and identity. And we're left, sometimes I think what would be left from my life that would tell anyone about who I was and the multiplicity of my experiences, and it's absent. And I see in your work this wonderful exploration of that difficult absence, and how do we get from these tiny remains that we have, and how do we learn to see what is missing? So that's just a comment, and I think I find your works fascinating from that perspective. I thought maybe you can just talk a little bit about why embroidery. Why did you choose this as your medium, your method?
Yeah, well, it's a technique that I learned as a child. So it's something that kind of forced into as part of my education, and I didn't particularly enjoy it as a child. But then when I realized the first map that I showed, the only one which is actually in colors, because it's a work about memory and dissolving of memory, it became quite intuitive for me that I had to realize it with embroidery, which is a technique that belonged to the past, I thought. And then surprisingly, from that one work, I moved to the next one, and I realized how versatile embroidery is, and I started using it in an extensive way, and I mean, with the declination into video and performance, and so trying to really activate the technique in ways which go far beyond the, let's say, traditional handcraft.
Okay, thank you. Just one final comment or question. So we're talking about identity, and you're Italian living in Dubai. And how has this influenced your work to be in a different place, disconnected? Or are you connected?
Well, it's even more complicated than that, because I'm Greek, Italian. I grew up in Italy, but I'm also Lebanese. So then I moved to Lebanon, and then, so I'm really I think the Mediterranean identity would probably embody it in a more precise way. And that's where I think those maps of the overlapping and that sense of a created identity and the not given identity is something that is probably relating to my experience more, and it's something that I'm more interested in exploring rather than a very clear and immediate sense of belonging.
Thank you. And I think, the fluidity of our identities these days is still a bit challenging to acknowledge, and it's, to even live and inhabit, certainly bureaucratically. So thank you so much. So I'll move to Neville, and I will say a few words that I'm sure everyone is familiar with from your work here. So Neville Wakefield is a writer and curator interested in exploring the ways in which art behaves outside of institutional contexts. He sees that art is most successful, enlightening, and provocative when it goes beyond stereotypical labels and white spaces and is revealed in new spaces. I have a whole list of all the work that you've done here. But I think it's perhaps more interesting to move to you to talk about your work that you would like to present here this evening in relation to the theme of the panel. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm not sure what's on this side carousel, actually.
Oh, can I pass?
Hopefully it'll be something relevant. Yeah, I was just going to talk a little bit about actually the legacy of land art, particularly in relationship to Desert X. It's, Desert X has a slightly, it's not an orthodox form of curating, I think. Where traditional curation would perhaps, you start with a thesis and collect artists and artworks to illustrate it and sort of impose the thesis on the works. I think the thesis in Desert X is the landscape itself, is the land itself. And in fact, I go further than that and say that the landscape is the curator in Desert X. And by landscape, I mean landscape in the broadest sense, the historical, the social, the economic, and the archaeological version of it. And all those forms, sorry, I'm just flipping through a few of these to get to a place where I think we might rest. But so there's this idea that what is the legacy of land art and how do we deal with it? And when we think about it, we tend to think in terms of what was done in the sort of tertiary period in the late 60s and early 70s in America, which was mainly mainly white men going out and scarifying the surface and making these marks. So I think one of the things that we're trying to do is reconsider that legacy. And in doing so, we're thinking about different forms of different relationships that one can have with the past, immediate and distant. And I think this has happened through a number of works, and I'm trying to get to some of them. But in relation to the particular topic at hand, one of the pieces in the last Desert X at Al-Ula, for instance, was by Sultan bin Fahd, was a desert kite, and that's an actual piece of archaeology that one finds here that he effectively recreated. It was. I'm sure you all know this form that was somewhat mysterious, and was the thinking is that it was to collect, corral and collect animals and also to trap them. So it had this important aspect, but a lot of them weren't, due to scale, a lot of them weren't seen until drone photography, until overhead photography came into being. So that's an example where I think where Desert X has explored actual architecture. And then the piece that we're looking at now is by Nicholas Galanin, who's a Native American artist, which is an exploration of what I call social architecture. And obviously it's a riff on the Hollywood sign. This was a piece that was done in the Palm Springs area, which is about 100 miles away from Hollywood. It was very connected to Hollywood. If you think of all the mid-century modern houses and that kind of thing, they were built by, as it were, I wouldn't say refugees, but exiles from Hollywood. The studio contracts meant that you couldn't be further than 110 miles from the studios, and Palm Springs was at that limit. So it became a haven for these people to do what they want, which included making these extraordinary architectural mid-century expressions, but also leading lifestyles that they couldn't do under the public spotlight. So Nicholas researched the Hollywood sign and uncovered that the history, which originally it started off as Hollywood Land, and it was a real estate development, and of course it was on Indian land. So he was interested in this kind of social archaeology that connected the history of Hollywood with its depictions of cowboys and Indians, and this white settler version of America, with something much darker and more real in many ways, which was his genocidal history, that obviously was directly affected all the First Nations peoples and disinherited them from their land. So this was an example of I think, land art that really explored the idea of who this land belonged to. And I think it did that effectively because it was rendered at the same scale as a Hollywood sign, so it was a spectacle. People came along, took their selfie in front of it, and then realized only later that it was sort of a Trojan horse, and buried within it was this deep and very dark social history, which was about the expulsion of and disenfranchisement of the Native Americans from their own land. And I think I'll stop there.
Thank you. I mean, this is an incredibly powerful piece, and I think, as you say, works on so many levels, from the selfie to that dark violence that sits within it. In your experience of working here in Saudi Arabia, you've worked at Al Ula, you're here in Riyadh. Have you been able to tap into these deep levels of history in the works that you're curating and working with the artists?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're always really present. We're just about to open TEDx in Al Ula next week, so hopefully some of you will see it there. And I think there you'll see various expressions of that, and you know, I mean, I think they take many different forms. But a good example that you from the last one might be Dana Awatani's work, which was obviously directly referencing some of the greatest archaeological expressions in the region, the Nabatean tombs, and it was a stone sculpture that referenced the stepping of it, and really made one think about ideas of hierarchy and memorialization and structure and the relationship between past and present.
Yeah, thank you. I think I have a couple of broader questions, and then we can go out if anyone has questions for the speakers. So just quite a general question. So identity's been at the heart of our discussion today, and the idea of legacy and connection to place. Perhaps, Sarah, you could maybe speak to how this, is this a core consideration in your creative practice? And if so, how?
It's a big question. I think, wow, how do you even start? I think my life since, even my parents, it was a bit transient and moving through different cultures, and the house was a place where people of any culture or faith or many things combined. So I guess I grew up with that being the norm, and then meeting people that had a very distinct path was the thing to understand, not like the other way around. So for me, actually, my interest is more making work that hits on universal qualities that help us understand ourselves better. That's really what I'm interested in, because where I come from and where I present work is always kind of an interesting aspect of my personal life, but it's not really what I'm interested in researching, let's say, because I think so many people were brought up in different languages and have to move to different places, and that's just a part of your story, but it's not necessarily your passion. Like it can be, but there's so much within us to delve from. And also I think sometimes we find ourselves in a culture we're not from, let's say, but we find ourselves more seen by it than another. So yeah, I try not to have an attachment in that way. Also in that sense, for me, like the landscape is the best place to be, because like I think it was Thoreau that said like the tree is the best mirror like you can look at. I'm paraphrasing, but something like that, because it doesn't judge you, you don't judge yourself if you believe that that's what you look like as well. So I think the landscapes I grew up around have a massive impact on location for me in that sense. Yeah, maybe the strongest for me is the redwoods. It's super magical in the Pacific Ocean. And then actually my dad was an archaeologist, and I grew up seeing pictures of Al-Ula in a time when it was very different, very sacred, spiritual only, you know. And so I guess I just started getting to go there, and that in parallel had that same like grand, super spiritual feeling to it. So yeah.
Thank you. Neville, would you like to speak to this idea of identity and creative practice?
Sure, I'll try. I mean, in this conversation about archaeology, one of the things I was thinking about was, I don't know whether it was Ballard or J.G. Ballard or Robert Smithson, but or perhaps both of them, but thinking about archaeologies of the future and how artists may be in this kind of unique position to create relics of an era that has yet to be lived. And I think that's, you know, a really exciting and important aspect of this discussion about archaeology.
Yeah, I think that's very prescient, if I may use that term, because I do feel like artists are always commenting on things that many people can't quite see yet. And that does create that kind of temporal shift and captures something that might otherwise be lost. And I see that in the works that we've looked at today as well. And Christina.
Well, I think that there are, like, especially for artists who work with archaeology in a more like a conscious way or more like a intentional way, there is on one side the notion of preserving memory, which is very often, especially for artists who work in the Middle East with situations that we know have not been ideal to the preservation of archaeological remains. So there is this intentionality of kind of covering that aspect, or at least raising awareness about that. And on the other side, for many artists, is also a matter of reclaiming identity, an identity which is perhaps less obvious, which is often kind of sided, sometimes also intentionally, because when you move from place to place and you are coming from countries which not necessarily are seen as under the best light, you tend to minimize certain aspects, but those aspects of your identity or cultural belonging re-emerge at some point. And if you are like a creative, like an artist, you would probably try to find ways of elaborating that complexity of negating, but at the same time reclaiming and preserving in multiple ways.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that's a very important point about the loss and the gain that we go through as we move through our identities. We just have a few minutes. Does anyone have any questions for our wonderful artists and curators? No, we've covered everything, so thank you. I have to say, sorry, I have a closing remarks that I think I have to say. One sec. So I think I'm supposed to mention the final week of programming on the 16th and 17th of February. So please do join us. The theme will be Many Hands Make Light Work, the future of arts and culture in the Gulf. The exhibition is on until the 2nd of March. And that's it. I would just like to say an enormous thank you to Sarah, Neville and Christina for bringing their wonderful intelligence to this conversation tonight. Thank you so much.